Good morning, students. Today we begin with the history of print media in India. I have already shared a PPT. Here, in this lecture, I will be discussing the early beginnings of the print media in India. So, talking about the newspaper, the birth of newspaper, the first name to be remembered is that of James Augustus Hickey. James Augustus Hickey. So he was the person who was behind the birth of newspaper in India. We have the first weekly print Bengal Gazette, which came out in 1780. And talking about the newspaper Bengal Gazette, it catered only for British residents in India. And I should say that this is a newspaper which was not even worthy to be called a newspaper because it contained all those non serious news, all those gossips, and mainly commercials. So that is why I said that this is a newspaper which didn't fit to what you now see as a newspaper. Here we had only commercials, only gossips, which were there around these British residents. And James Augustus Hickey, he also ran a campaign against this Governor General Warren Hastings in this particular newspaper in Bengal Gazette. So think about a newspaper talking against this government, or he Warren Hastings, an autocratic ruler. So campaign against this autocratic ruler. What will be its future? The future? Hickey was jailed and the press was seized and this British Gazette was shut down. So this was the first newspaper, I should say, to first to face this anger of the state, which talked against the state and became the first to face the ire of the state, though it was not for noble reasons. Talking against authority, it meant only gossips, all those non serious news, all those nonsense he wrote against the government. That actually generated anger. So, this is the beginning of newspaper in India. Please remember this name, James Augustus Hickey, and his newspaper Bengal Gazette. Now comes the father of Indian journalism. He is James Silk Beckingham. He started this newspaper, Calcutta Journal, and he assumed the editorship, which happened in 1818. So, this is an 8-page bi weekly newspaper priced at rupee 1. So, rupee 1 at that time it was very expensive. So, this is a bi weekly, once in 2 weeks, and it contained 8 page, which included all those political. So, it is the first newspaper to be called worthy to be called as a newspaper. As you see, the structure of newspaper now. So it contained all those political, commercial, and literary news and views. And that is why it, it had this major difference. It is completely different from Bengal Gazette. It included all those contemporary issues, all those editorials. In those editorials, James Silk Beckingham talked against all those local customs like sati, and he went against the government. He talked about government's failure to put an end to it. He also gave prominence to news and views from Bengali and Persian journalism. He was considered to be a friend of Indian press. He was a great friend of Rajaram Mohan Roy. So there is something like a contention that who is the father of Indian journalism. Some term, some consider James Silk Beckingham as the father of journalism, Indian journalism, while others consider Rajaram Mohan Roy as the father of Indian journalism. Both were friends. And James Silk Beckingham, he defended the rights of press. It talked about he used this newspaper to voice the opinions of the people. So he, when you compare this person, Silk Beckingham, with James Augustus Hickey, he was a true journalist in its fullest sense. He was a journalist in its fullest sense. That is why he even talked about his own people, and British authorities became intolerant on account of his persistent criticism of their policies. He even criticized British policies. John Adam, the acting Governor General, he finally deported Buckingham to England. So, as I said earlier, many describe Buckingham as the first real journalist in India. So, please remember this name, James Silk Buckingham, and his paper, Calcutta Journal, which was an 8-page bi-weekly newspaper which contained all those, uh, all those, uh, all those contents as you see the in the newspaper right now. Now, when you talk about Indian press, we should mention the contributions of missionaries. As you know, missionaries were the ones who were there all over India, and their main aim was to spread Christianity among the natives. So these missionaries found newspaper as the right medium to spread their religion, to spread this new religion. They understood that newspaper can be the right medium which can be used to spread their religion. So that is why we have the first printing press which was brought to the country in 1556 by all those Christian missionaries. Even the first book were by Christian missionaries. And most of the language newspapers, most of the regional newspapers in India were started by the missionaries. Please think about that. All those missionaries who came from Britain, they started all those language newspaper. So first they had to learn the language. So think about the difficulty they had gone through. They first had to learn the language and then create the types for the first time. Type in Malayalam it is അച്ച്. അച്ച് ഓരോ വാക്കുകൾക്കുമുള്ള അച്ചുകൾ കണ്ടുപിടിക്കുക. So they had to first learn the language and then create the types for the first time. And they were the ones who contributed to the linguistic structuring of all those regional languages in India. And to a great extent, they pioneered journalism culture in India. And in this context, a particular group of missionaries should be mentioned. They are Serampur missionaries. They are a group of Baptist missionaries from England who settled down at Serampur in Bengal. And they were the ones who started the first vernacular newspaper, the first regional newspaper, which was Darshan Bengali Monthly in 1818. and it carried reports of all those political activities, but it carefully avoided all those political controversies because they wanted to avoid a controversy which will badly affect their newspaper. So that was the first vernacular newspaper, Digdarshan. And later, in 1929, the name of Digdarshan was changed to Samachar Darpan and it became bilingual. What is bilingual? Bilingual. It started also, this newspaper was also in English. Earlier it was only the Bengali edition. Now there was this English newspaper were also available. And it collected news from many places in Bengal and nearby places. So the basic objectives, as I said earlier, they used these newspapers, as an aid for the conversion to Christianity and also to support the views of British administrators in India. They never talked against all those British policies, as you see in the newspaper of James Silk Buckingham. But it should be kept in mind that news about India and Indians occupied the largest amount of space in these publications. Earlier, there were news, mostly news from British residents and newspapers in the early beginnings. They were actually meant for Britishers to know the news from their land, about them, about all those British residents in India. So that is a important point when you come to the newspapers run by these missionaries. They actually talked about India and Indians, the news about the native people. So these are the first newspapers in Kannada. We have the first newspaper, Kannada Samachar, by Christian missionaries, and Satyaduda. It is the first newspaper in Telugu. Odia got its first newspaper in 1849, and first newspaper in Malayalam, it is Rajya Samacharam by Herman Gundat. So here in Kerala, we should remember the contributions of CMS missionaries in Kottayam. It is one of the earliest beginnings of newspapers in Kerala. So these are the first regional newspapers. So when you talk about first regional newspapers, you should talk about the contribution of missionaries. Now we have Rajaram Mohan Roy, who needs no introduction, the first major name to be mentioned in Indian journalism. As you know, he was a social reformer and he used this press as a weapon for reforms. And he is considered by most historians, as I said earlier, there is something like a contention. He is also considered as the father of Indian journalism. He not only ran newspapers, he even sponsored many journals. He edited them. He fought for social reforms. And in all these newspapers, he had he had been defending different criticisms again in different levels. He even defended criticisms leveled against Vedanta philosophy, which was attacked by these Christian missionaries. Christian missionaries had this aim to convert these natives into Christians. So here Rajaram defended these Indian philosophies. And these are the newspapers which were published by Rajaram Mohan Roy at various times. So the first name, you should remember this. Last time there was this question, Sambad Kaumudi, published by Rajaram Mohan Roy. So this is a Bengali weekly published in December 1821. And the Calcutta Journal, edited by James Silk Beckingham, he gave ample publicity in its column to this new Indian project. As I said earlier, they were friends. This Rajaram Mohan Roy and James Silk Beckingham, they were friends. So when Sambad Kaumudi came when came into existence, James Silk Beckingham gave advertisements, publicity in his newspaper, and he has this another newspaper, Miraut Akbar. So this is a Persian weekly. So you should remember this Persian was the official language of the Mughal Empire, and it was published on every Friday. And this weekly devoted space to national and international events. And later, Miraut Akbar was shut down in 1823, and it was a protest. Rajaram Mohan Roy closed this particular newspaper as an act of protest against then Press Regulation Act, which came out in 1823. So he was the one who should be called the first Indian with the all who can be qualified as a true journalist, the first journalist who used this newspaper to as a medium to bring about a social change. He never cared for all those uh, controversies. He he openly went against all those British policies. And he had this another one, Brahminical magazine, which was a monthly published in English. And as I said earlier, it was to counter the missionaries' propaganda to spread Christianity. Here, he defended all those Indian values. So the 12 issues of this magazine appeared, and later a regular periodical in English and Bengali titled Brahmin Sevadi was started by Rajaram Mohan Roy. So, mainly through these above journals, Rajaram Mohan Roy tried to counter all those accusations of these missionaries, and it also they were also used to form public opinion in favor of social reforms. These publications these publications marked the real beginning of journalism in India, as they were all addressed to Indians in their own languages. So please remember these facts. The first Hindi language newspaper, it was Uddand Martand, which was published by Pandit Jugal Kishore Sukul on a weekly basis in the year 1826. The first Hindi language newspaper, Uddand Martand. And we have, please remember this one, Bombay Samachar, which was started by Fardaunji Murzban in 1822. It is the oldest newspaper which is still in existence. ഇപ്പോഴും ഉള്ളതാണ് Bombay Samachar, which started in 1822, which is still going on. So here ends the first lecture regarding the early beginnings of Indian newspaper. So you need to remember lot of facts which will come as 2 mark questions. So please remember all these facts and have an idea about the evolution of print media in India. So, right now I am stopping my lecture. Hope it is clear. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.